You don't have to believe me. If it's hard, I don't blame you. Washington is a city that manufactures versions, press releases, speeches, stories polished at the edges. If you sit watching the storefronts on K Street in January, you'll see the snow twist under the wind between taxis and silences. You'll see the gold letters in lobbies and guards with coats too thin. You'll see men and women who think cold is a formality. That idea fooled me too. For years I thought temperature could be measured with a thermometer, not with an absence. My name is Nolan. Nolan Bailey, for the record. I'm a lawyer. Not one of those who appear on television. I'm the kind who breathes inside libraries with green-shaded lamps and drinks coffee from paper cups stained by tired fingers. If you were with me now, you'd hear the wood creak in my house on Capitol Hill, that tiny crack that appears when night falls and the heating breaks the silence. I'd speak slowly, because I learned to measure my voice so as not to break everything completely. Outside, the streets are covered with that dirty snow piled against the curbs, and on the porch the footprints erase themselves as if the house wanted to forget too. I think about the winter when everything unraveled. I think about DuPont Circle with its fountain turned off, a frozen circle where dogs tug at their owners and the smoke from mouths blends into a single cloud. I think about the Potomac, gray and taut, with gulls that have hard eyes. I think about the 5 o'clock light that turns every window into a mirror. And I think about her. Claire. Sometimes I say her name softly, as if it were a secret that no longer belongs to me. Other times I avoid it for hours, like a child circling the hot thing that burned him. We met in an elevator in Judiciary Square. Her phone vibrated with an anxious rhythm that, in time, I learned was her way of tightening the day. I carried a cheap briefcase then. She held a white folder, marked up in green ink. Memory is capricious, I don't keep dates, but I remember that color and the smell of wet snow when we left together and the air hit us like a hand. She told me she hated January. I said December was worse. She smiled with those teeth that always seemed ready to apologize for the world's sadness. We were together 10 years. Not everything was a lie. If it were, it wouldn't hurt like this. I'm not going to justify what I did. I fired a gun. That's on the record. I didn't hide. I'm not going to start there, because the shot wasn't the beginning, it was the echo. Before that there was what always is, fissures nobody wants to look at because they demand work, surrender, rearranging the map of oneself. My job had trained me to see cracks in contracts, not in people. You learn to win at long tables with lined water glasses and uncomfortable chairs, not to lose in your own kitchen, with the refrigerator light illuminating a glass of lukewarm milk at 3 in the morning. In my office on K Street, winter came in through the seams of the double panes. The building had those Venetian blinds that never close all the way and let a thread of light through like a civilized knife. From the window I watched long coats, taxis, executives crossing like pieces moved by an invisible hand. I was working a case about a company that had fired an employee for reporting harassment. The sort of case you win with patience, with paper, with witnesses who at first deny and then remember in fragments. I didn't know it then, but that training would be the framework on which I'd build my revenge. His name was Hall. Grayson Hall. I'd seen him before at receptions and panels. He was the kind of man who wears his smile like a business card, straight, white, obliging. He worked for a consulting and lobbying firm with a marble building and identical receptionists who said good afternoon without looking you in the eye. If you passed through his lobby it smelled of expensive wood and a masculine cologne. Once I heard him speak on a panel about corporate ethics. He said the expected things. He spoke like those who know the power of their voice lies not in words but in the backing of a grateful board. I was just another person in the coffee line, watching the clock, waiting to get back to my files. I don't know when it started between him and Claire. There are signs I now reconstruct, like drops of water that finally reveal a shape beneath glass. She changed the way she brushed her hair before leaving. She became adept at forgetting one particular errand, always the same, so she had an excuse to come home in the late afternoon, pick it up and leave for that short meeting in Georgetown. She began to wear the perfume I had given her only when we went out together, not when she went to work. Those small things that in the moment don't read as warnings, but as the breathings of the day. I was, as always, busy. Busyness is an elegant poison that keeps you standing while it empties you. The day I found them, the city was coated in a thin layer of ice that turned footsteps into a clumsy choreography. There was a whistle on the old trolley wires near H Street. I remember the sound because it still runs through my teeth. It was a coincidence. I wasn't looking for anything. I left the office early, a decision with no clear reason, and took Massachusetts Avenue North, the radio off. The light was flat, that winter light that crushes edges and makes everything look like a photocopied document. Her car wasn't there. What was there was a different kind of silence, the silence of two held breaths. You recognize that kind of silence with your body before your mind. I'm not going to describe the scene for sensation. There's no need. A room, a bed, clothes tossed on the floor, her perfume mixed with an expensive male scent, and Claire's eyes, with a pleading I didn't know how to translate. Hall stammered something that wasn't an apology but an explanation from a man who believes everything has a price. I didn't shout. My voice, when I heard it, sounded in a way I didn't know, a kind of neutral tone without warmth. I remember thinking, this will be resolved by procedure. My hands trembled, but it was a small, almost technical tremor, like signing an important document after an all-nighter. I told them to get dressed. I told them to come downstairs. There were no blows. No insults. I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on for tea, and while it began to vibrate, my hand opened the drawer where I kept the gun. Registered, of course. I go to the shooting range from time to time, they say it helps you focus. I took it the way you take a pen. I didn't think, I'm going to shoot. I thought of the cold metal and the black line of the barrel as a sentence that had to be finished. Hall was standing by the photo cabinet. He wore a defensive smile, the twitch of someone who negotiates in elevators. Claire sat with her elbows on her knees, looking at the floor. I said her name. I said his. I also said, get out. Hall stepped toward me. And then it happened. Not from anger, though I know that's hard to believe. It was a clumsy movement, the fright of his body stepping back, the tea steaming and beginning to whistle, 10 years compressed into milliseconds. The shot was low, oblique, ugly. The bullet entered through his buttock and tore through muscle and pride. He fell with a scream the house did not deserve. Claire cried my name. I lowered the gun. I was the one who called emergency services. It was the only morally limp thing I could do in that instant. The police arrived smelling of damp wool and authority. My hands were open, empty. I said, it was an accident. I also said, I fired. They took Hall out on a stretcher. He didn't even look at me. Neighbors watched from their windows as if winter had given them permission. They brought me to the station. I gave a statement. My lawyer, yes, lawyers have lawyers too, advised me to say little. I said very little. The prosecutor understood it wasn't an attempt at homicide. There was negligence, there was humiliation, there was a weapon where it shouldn't have been. There was also, in my favor, a clean record, straightforward cooperation. The rest remained in the file like stains that persist but no longer kill. If the story were only a shot, you wouldn't be listening. The shot was a door. Behind it was the important thing, the architecture of a man and of a city. Because Washington feeds predators with silver cutlery. They wash their hands in ethics committees, allocate funds to charities that look good in newsletters, hire mediation services for victims while at the same time pushing away those who insist too much. I knew it in the abstract, I understood it in my own home. Hall was not an accident. He was a system, a name on a plaque plus the protection of a board that used him because he did the dirty work with an acceptable smile. 2 days after my release on bail, a woman sought me out. Not in person. An unmarked envelope, left on my gate with snow stuck to one corner. Inside, a white card with her name and a number. Sarah. Hall's wife. I'd seen her photo at some charity gala, sober dress, discreet jewels, that look of women who learn to stand in photos without disturbing the frame. I called. Her voice was glass. She told me she didn't want to speak on the phone. If I accepted, we'd meet at a cafe on 17th Street near the church, where tourists stop to check their maps with hands in their pockets. I went. On the way, the city imposed a false calm, men in wool hats rushing, steam rising from subway grates, red lights forming a column down the avenue. In the cafe, she sat at a table by the window. She didn't wear a ring. Her fingers were long and clean. She looked at me like one looks at a piece of art about to fall, measuring whether it's worth holding. She asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. We talked about trivial things for 3 minutes: the weather, the price of parking, the bad coffee in the courthouse. Then, without transition, she said, "I don't want to divorce him." Not yet. I couldn't tell if she was asking forgiveness or permission. She added, "I want him to pay in the only way he understands, by losing everything that supports him." I didn't ask her to clarify. It wasn't necessary. She knew, as I did, that a personal humiliation is a spectacle and it fades, but a professional fall is pedagogy. She said she knew of other women. She used the plural with surgical precision. 4, she said. And she opened her bag and took out a black notebook with stitched pages. Names, dates, places. I don't want a show. I want structure. Had we been other kinds of people, we might have embraced? We didn't. What we did was agree on method. I won't romanticize that alliance. It wasn't friendship. It was a cold pact between two people wounded in different ways. She brought names, suspicions, the map of a house. I brought craft. While the city kept its winter markets and lights that tried to look warm, we built a file for history. Not only against him. Against those who surrounded him and profited from his lobbying skills and functional smiles. In an empty office of my firm, on Sunday afternoons with the distant hum of traffic on E Street, we spread documents like cards in a sober deck, emails, messages, event invitations, photos, receipts. From her side came notes that seemed innocuous: dinner with team and a time. I cross-referenced them with attendees' calendar entries. Coincidences formed patterns. Patterns, evidence. They were not mistresses. That word misleads. They were competent professionals pushed against glass walls by dynamics the city dresses in bespoke suits. One was a junior analyst at his firm, another, a journalist, another, a summer practice lawyer, the fourth, an assistant to a key client. Their stories varied but shared the same structure: early praise, the promise of mentorship, an invitation to talk about your career in a hotel bar with low lights, the touch that begins seeming accidental, the guilt reversed when they pull away, the small reward when they yield, the silence imposed in exchange for advancement. These were not films. They were procedures. I'm no hero. I say that because I know myself. Part of me wanted revenge in its most primitive form, the kind that warms you inside and empties you afterward. Another part, the part that wanted something worse for him and his system, the cold ordering of truth into columns that could not be denied. We started with the basics: witnesses. I heard and it seemed weren't enough. We needed voices, faces, backing. Sarah contacted the first, the analyst. She suggested meeting in a neutral place, a public library. In the reading room, under the lamps, the woman spoke with long pauses. Her hands trembled at first. Then they found a rhythm. Her account had dates. I wrote them down. I asked, with the driest courtesy I could muster, that she check her email for dinner invitations, messages with ambiguous phrases that always carry an undertone of threat. She found them. Some held guilt like a dress chosen in the dark. We made copies. The second woman, the journalist, met us at a cafe near the Foggy Bottom station. She was tougher. She knew how to handle questions. She also knew where to draw the line. From her I learned that in this city, a victim cannot afford that name without paying a price few are willing to bear. Her story was brief. but she gave us something invaluable, an audio. She hadn't said recording when she said audio. She kept it, just in case. Inside that just in case lived all her distrust. We listened to it silently at the cafe, out of respect for her restraint. Later, in the empty office, with headphones, I transcribed it. Hall's voice was his best weapon. He promised her access, spoke of informal meetings with directors, said he knew how to clear the path if she played well. Played. That word betrayed him. The third, the young attorney, agreed to come to the office. She brought a friend. They sat together, as if the chair needed a double backrest. With her, the story was a map of small betrayals, a hand on her back as they left an elevator, a "don't worry, I'll handle it," followed by 2 weeks of unanswered calls after she said, "This doesn't make me comfortable," a veiled comment in a meeting about her temperament. She had emails. We printed them. I read them slowly, marking in blue the places where corporate language scrubbed violence clean enough to make it palatable. The fourth, the client's assistant, met us on a bench at the mall, facing the museums, on a day of fine, whispering snow. She said little. Just what was needed. She was afraid, the sober kind of fear this city teaches you when your rent depends on a modest paycheck in a building with worn carpet. She gave us a name, a board member who'd been present at a dinner where Hall, already drunk, had made comments that admitted no second reading. The man laughed. The man changed the subject. The man signed a year-end bonus check. With that piece, the map had a center. It wasn't just about Hall anymore. It was about the board, what they knew, what they tolerated, what they buried under layers of compliance and internal protocols. Law teaches you that responsibility lies where control resides. If the directors knew and didn't act, they were complicit. And if they were complicit, they could be sued. Not for the affair that sells papers, but it doesn't win cases, but for the hostile work environment, for negligence in protecting employees, for concealment. What this city calls handling things internally, I was going to call by its name. The strategy was so simple it was almost embarrassing. First, consolidate evidence: audio, emails, testimonies, calendars, receipts. Second, formally notify the company that multiple consistent allegations of misconduct by a key executive existed, attaching minimal proof to force a response. Third, anticipate the firm's crisis playbook, the independent investigation led by a friendly consultant, the press release, the voluntary leave for family time, and overrun it. How? By making the chain of knowledge visible, showing that the board had known for years and, despite it, had promoted him, rewarded him, sent him to represent the firm on ethics panels, protected him after at least 4 documented incidents. In that mirror, the city would see itself. It wasn't romantic work. It was tedious. Nights in my office, with the heater humming and the invisible clock of my skin reminding me that dawn doesn't wait. Outside, snowplows piled gray mountains at corners, and the bars on H Street closed with chairs flipped onto tables. Inside, I read, underlined, arranged files into folders with neutral names: Chronology A, Chronology B, Informal Interactions. Sarah arrived with mathematical punctuality, carrying thermoses of tea in her black notebook, its corners already bent. We never spoke of my gunshot. Nor of her marriage behind closed doors. We were 2 technicians assembling a machine. We delivered the notification to the company on a Thursday morning, snow clinging to the edges of my coat. The receptionist wore a red sweater that looked like an error in that marble lobby. An assistant tried to make us wait in a secondary room. I insisted on leaving the envelope addressed to the board and the audit committee. We didn't raise our voices. No one did. The cold did the work of tightening them. Then we stepped outside, and on the corner a man was selling chestnuts, steam rising as if something in the world could still smell like home. The response arrived 48 hours later, the expected statement, with the expected words. The company takes this matter very seriously. Independent investigation. No further comment until completion. I knew it would come, and I already had the next step ready: protecting the women from retaliation. It's not just about winning, it's about ensuring the collateral damage doesn't crush those who spoke up. I coordinated with a friendly labor law firm and a university legal clinic. Asked them to be ready. We filed preservation letters, that simple tool that forbids deleting emails or chats. And we requested the board's decision chain for promotions and bonuses. Then came the maneuvers. Calls to the women to talk. Emails offering reassignment opportunities. Silences that were tactics. The junior analyst was offered a transfer. The young attorney, a mentorship with a female partner. The journalist was warned that confidentiality was key to preserving the investigation. The client's assistant was told by her boss that the project's budget had changed and her participation needed to be recalibrated. That vocabulary is a maze whose exit leads to the same desks. So we brought out the recordings. Not to the press, not yet, but to the firm hired to run the independent investigation. We requested a meeting. Brought transcripts, cross-dated entries, and one detail, an email from a board member, 2 years earlier, writing to Hall, "Please, more discretion with the team." A bullet wrapped in cellophane. The investigator, wearing an expensive coat and eyes trained to trace outlines, read it twice. He didn't react. His silence was our confirmation. We asked for everything to be entered into record. When we stepped out, the 3 o'clock sun hit the snow in the plaza and made it shine as if someone had finally decided to clean something. We filed the civil suit against the board on a Monday. I chose that day for its banality. I didn't want epic. I wanted routine. The complaint didn't speak of adultery. It spoke of a hostile environment, breach of fiduciary duty, gross negligence in employee protection, and cover-up. It listed the incidents without voyeurism, with dates, names, audio fragments. Attached the email showing knowledge and advancement. It requested injunctions, Hall's suspension, bonus retention, preservation of digital evidence, the seizing of 2 directors' corporate phones. It also requested something less visible, an independent monitor for 1 year. If you know this world, you know what that means, a foreign body looking under the rugs. The city reacted as it always does, with opinion columns written in the lazy hours of the afternoon, with calls traded between offices, with discreet dinners in 14th Street restaurants where no one orders dessert. Hall disappeared for a week. Then he resurfaced with a statement declaring himself deeply sorry for any misunderstanding and committed to the process. The word misunderstanding made me sick. Sarah called that night. Not to vent, not to cry. She said, "Keep going." Then she hung up. There was a moment in the process that broke me a little, I'll admit. It happened in a windowless conference room, the air conditioner working too hard, while we took the deposition of the junior analyst. Question and answer. Rhythm. At one point, the company's lawyer, in a kind voice, asked if she had flirted with Hall. The word was not accidental. She straightened in her chair. Looked at me. Her eyes asked permission, the permission to say the obvious. I nodded, barely. No, she said. Then, with a dry mouth, added, and if I had, why does that make it okay for someone to touch me without my consent? It wasn't fury. It was moral precision. When we left that room, in the carpeted hallway, I stopped by the water cooler. I trembled just enough to need both hands to hold the cup. There was another scene, this time with one of the directors. A man in a blue suit, perfect hair, the smile of a credit line approved. I asked if he had received the more discretion email. He said he didn't remember. I showed him the document. He said it must have been taken out of context. I asked him to read the whole paragraph. He did. His lips moved in silence. It was a general comment, he said. I asked if general referred to a pattern. He said no. I asked if he considered asking for discretion an adequate response to possible misconduct. He paused. Said, we were monitoring. I asked how. He didn't know. Sometimes, victory is made of pauses. You're wondering about Claire. I still do, though it's no longer a question, it's a wall. She left the house the day of the shooting. The right thing, I suppose. I got the winter clothes and half the plates. She took the plants and the poetry books. I learned that absence has textures, the toothbrush missing from the sink, the mug no one leaves by the edge anymore, the coat that no longer hangs in that exact place on the rack. A week later, she sent an email. 3 short lines, I don't know what to say. I'm in a hotel. I'm sorry. It wasn't an apology. It was information. That's her style. I don't blame her. If I started blaming her, I'd lose myself in hallways that are too easy. As the case advanced, more voices appeared. A former assistant. An Uber driver who once gave a ride from a hotel bar. A receptionist who remembered canceling a meeting room at the last minute for Mr. Hall's business. Each piece was small, but together they formed that figure behind the glass we could finally name. The press smelled blood only when it became clear the case wouldn't vanish with a quick settlement. One morning, leaving court, microphones surrounded me. I said little. Repeated what was already in the filing. My voice didn't shake. On television, the city cut by drone shots looked like a chessboard. Seeing my face in that frame made me angry. I hate that game. The company tried to negotiate. Offers came, settlements with confidentiality clauses so airtight they could have sealed an army inside. Sarah and I examined each one as if weighing a stone to build a bridge. We rejected most. Accepted only those that protected the women and kept the monitor in place, with real access. Meanwhile, the board began to shed parts of itself, as if pruning dry branches could save the trunk. They replaced the HR director. Announced culture workshops. The usual. I insisted on one point, that executive bonuses be frozen for the year and a fund created to compensate affected employees. Not out of charity. Out of accounting justice. The day of the key hearing, the cold was a blade. I walked down Pennsylvania Avenue with my hands in my pockets, my tie a little loose. The snow had melted into puddles that reflected the buildings as if they were tired. In my bag were numbered copies, testimony summaries, audio fragments marked with precise timestamps. Sitting in the courtroom, I looked around. The directors, in sober suits and quiet watches. Hall, pale. He still walked with a slight tilt, that shadow of the bullet turned into posture. Sarah sat 2 rows back, her coat buttoned to the neck, eyes fixed on a point between my shoulder and their table. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. The judge listened patiently. My argument was a contained river, no adjectives, just structures. A pattern of behavior. A culture of permissiveness. A chain of knowledge sustained over time. Board decisions that favored revenue over integrity. A cover-up dressed as process. I showed him the dates, the ladder of each promotion Hall received, the emails that asked for discretion instead of action, the recordings where his voice spoke of clearing the path in exchange for playing well. When I finished, there was the thick silence that precedes the fall of old snow from a roof edge. The defense spoke of individual mistakes, of a commitment to change. It avoided the plural altogether. The judge denied some of our injunctions. I'm not a flattering narrator, but granted the 2 that mattered most, the independent monitor with access to 3 years of corporate emails and phones, and the freezing of executive bonuses until the final report. He also urged the company to open a secure whistleblower line with external oversight. It wasn't an absolute victory. It was enough. Sometimes the law does the right thing, it just does it quietly. The reaction was swift. 2 directors resigned before the monitor could inspect their devices. The board called an emergency assembly. In it, behind phrases about future vision, they asked Hall to leave for good, without severance. For the press, they used the word agreement. For the accounting books, it was lost due to contingencies. For me, it was the sound of something breaking in the right place, for once. The firm also announced structural reforms, appointing a head of compliance from an NGO instead of a friendly consultancy. I know masks, I know many reforms are written for auditors. But the monitor, with an office, with access, was real. I don't know if you can hear me believing in justice. Not the movie kind, where the guilty confess with tears and the innocent are applauded by crowds. I mean the kind that happens in boardrooms when the doors close and someone says, "We can't keep paying for this," and suddenly the equation shifts. It doesn't sound epic. It sounds like papers being signed, like bonuses frozen, like emails written carefully. It sounds like a new kind of fear. That fear doesn't heal you, but it lets you sleep a little better. In the city, winter slowly began to give way. The ice along Rock Creek Park cracked into thin threads. Children returned to the swings. In Georgetown, the warm lights in shop windows looked a little less false. I kept walking the same streets, sometimes stopping by the cathedral to sit for 5 minutes on a bench, not to pray, but to listen to how absence sounds inside old stone. I went back to my routine: cases, hearings, documents. The gunshot stayed in my record like a poorly done tattoo. It doesn't make me proud. It doesn't define me either. It's a scar I've learned not to touch. Sarah called months later, for one last meeting. It was in a small bar in Shaw, dim lights, wooden tables. She ordered tea. I asked for water. She told me she was leaving the city for a while. That she had family in another state. That she needed different air. She thanked me without words, a small tilt of the head. I didn't ask about her private life, and she didn't ask about mine. As we said goodbye, she asked if I regretted starting all of it. I said something that still surprises me: I don't know if regret is an adult word. You just do what you can with what's left. She smiled faintly. What's left, she repeated, as if testing the weight of the phrase. About Claire, I heard through others that she left her job. That she's studying, maybe something related to design or flowers. Someone said they saw her coming out of a flower shop, hands stained green. The image doesn't hurt. I picture her among leaves, scissors, perfumes that don't bite. I imagine her far from my arguments and his. Sometimes, passing Union Station, where we used to meet when our schedules didn't match, I feel a soft punch in my gut. It doesn't last. Just long enough. I've learned to live with that small fracture. It's my reminder that no one walks away unscarred. I told you at the start you didn't have to believe me. And yet, some days I think the whole city knew what we were before we admitted it ourselves. The glass towers on K Street reflect other towers. Boards reflect committees. People reflect other people. Hall was taken off the board, but I know there are others, with his well-practiced smile and his talent for wrapping harm in promises of access. I can't fix the city. Sometimes, though, I can make it sign. There are nights when I sit at the kitchen table, the same one where I heard the kettle whistle the day of the gunshot, and make a cup of tea. The kettle doesn't sound the same. The house doesn't either. The noises have found their new places. Through the window I watch the movement of what starts again: people coming home from work, dogs tugging at their leashes, steam rising from the subway grates like an old breath. I drink slowly. I don't think about happy endings. I think about necessary ones. About how cold seeps into things, and how, if you keep just enough heat, the house doesn't break. If you ask what I learned, I won't give you a line for tattoos. I learned something simple and brutal: that love doesn't vaccinate you against the abuse of power, and intelligence won't save you from doing the unforgivable. I learned that revenge can be a place to build justice if you strip it of spectacle, reduce it to procedures, to names, to dates that don't allow excuses. I learned to speak more quietly. To ask fewer questions of life and more of the record. To listen to how the city creaks in winter and to tell whether the sound comes from healthy wood settling, or from beams about to give way. The Monitor delivered his report a year later. It wasn't full of poetry. It was full of lists. Hall was barred from the industry for a time that, in Washington, amounts to a short eternity. The company paid, restructured, performed acts of contrition. Some of the women found better jobs, others didn't. No one fixed their past with money, but money stopped rewarding those who least deserved it. There were no cheers. No confetti. I liked that. When justice makes little noise, it breathes longer. One afternoon, it was snowing lightly. I walked across Key Bridge and looked down at the Potomac, its gray skin folded and restless. I thought about sending Claire a message. I didn't. I put my phone back in my pocket and rested my hands on the cold railing. The river doesn't tell stories. It only carries things. At the edge of the water, a few branches caught in the current turned slowly. I watched them as if they were a sentence repeated until its edges wore down and it became clean. I walked home through Roslyn, took the metro, got off at Eastern Market. In the marketplace, the lights reflected in puddles like coins no one bothers to pick up. I don't have a moral, but I do have an image. That January morning, in my office, while the city brushed off the snow with its usual gesture, I held an unimportant sheet of paper and saw, for a second, my life from above, a board with misplaced pieces. I realized the only way to save anything was to accept it was already lost. That was my move, not to rebuild what was before, but to make something else from what still stood. Call it coldness if you want. I call it necessary breathing. I'm not asking you to forgive me, nor to condemn him, as if that would clean everything. I'm telling you what happened so I won't forget it the easy way. I fired. I sued. I built evidence. I forced a mirror in front of people who live avoiding reflections. And in the end, when the city began again to smell of bread on Sunday mornings, butter and coffee, I found myself in my kitchen, kettle off, watching the window fog with my breath, and I understood something that still keeps me upright: cold is not an enemy. It's a measure. It tells you where you're broken, and where you still hold. It tells you who you are when there's nothing warm left to touch. If you're waiting for a closing line, maybe it's this: I learned not to trust what shines, but what survives the winter. And sometimes, yes, you have to ruin a corporation for a city to remember what truth sounds like when it falls on snow.